The warehouse is open. Tales from the Warehouse, Volume 63, MeiGray Authenticated, a day in the life. If it wasn't for rights fees and whatnot, I would actually have employed or deployed a music bed. But I think the Beatles and the owners of the catalog probably would have charged us a little too much to borrow a day in the life. So we'll just say hello to our friend Filipe Costa of MeiGray and MeiGray.com. Filipe, welcome back inside the warehouse. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing well. Glad to be here. Always a great time to talk to you, Scott.
We appreciate your time very, very much. We're going to go through literally a day in the life. There are so many of us, this guy included, who are longtime clients and hobbyists and collectors. And, you grow up loving, it's defunct now for the most part. You grow up loving Toys R Us. You're like, I'd love to work at a Toys R Us. You grow up loving pizza. I'd love to work at a pizzeria. You grow up loving donuts. I'd love to work at a donut store. You're a hobbyist. You collect NHL or NBA or this or that, and it goes through and is curated and authenticated by the MeiGray family to a person. I don't know a collector who wouldn't want to work at MeiGray. So it's always interesting when we get to peel back the curtain and take a look and say, you know what? Here's what my day's like. So this is one of those experiential visits, if you will. For a little bit of background, how long have you been with MeiGray, sir?
So March of this year was my 3-year anniversary. I started working in March of 2022. I had been working as a customer service rep at a photography company, and I saw the listing go up I'm just like, let me take a chance. I almost talked myself out of it. Took, my girlfriend and my mom essentially being like, you got to do it. Just take a chance. It can't hurt. And then, interview with Jim and Rob Gross up in the authentication department. And here we are now, 3 years strong.
3 years strong. And so from what you were doing with the cameras and whatnot, where was the correlation? You're like, I think there's a there, and you're a Devils fan. You collect. Did this magnify the collection? Did this speed it up a little bit? Or you're like, that's separate, Filipe part, but I'd love to see if I could work there.
So my goal had always been to work either in media or in sports. I went to Montclair. I'm a Montclair graduate. I worked at the college radio station. I did a little bit of sports coverage on my own. Never got to do any play-by-play, but always did, the recaps and working in the morning show they had, doing a lot of the sports. And my goal was always like, I want to work in radio, or I want to be involved in sports in some way, shape, or form. And then, radio kind of took a bit of a hit because I graduated in the midst of 2021. Job field for radio was very, very tough. So I kind of had to, in a sense, settle for just to have a job and then kind of keep looking. And then MeiGray came up, and I'm like, well, that's sports, and I'm a collector, and I'm like, why not try it? I looked at the job description, everything, and I'm like, all right, there's some things I'm going to have to learn. It's very clear that the expectation is for you to learn and become in this case, my title is Authentication Associate, to become that. And that's kind of where the ball went rolling. I thought to myself, when I finally got the confidence, like, why not?
3 years strong. I'm sure that there has been company evolution and sort of your vibe towards how things go and their vibe, not just to you, not to you personally, but it's, every company, for the sake of survival, evolves and grows and learns. And it's an amoeba out there. There's not, yes, you have cereal factories that have been around forever and ever. And even though the recipe might still be the same and how they take care of their people, but they learn and they grow and they do better. Talk to me a little bit about the evolution of the company since you started.
Yeah, I mean, when I came in, obviously working under Jim very closely with Stu in tandem, as well as Rob Gross, authentication process itself hasn't changed much, but really how we approach a lot of the things we do when we approach a lot of items, we've been being able to keep a much better track of finer details on things, which we always did to begin with, but it's become so key to understand the differences and changes in how teams handle things, being able to be more aware and learning more about whether it's how jerseys were handled 30 years ago by the Calgary Flames, or nowadays how the Charlotte Hornets are handling their jerseys. A lot of it is evolving and adapting, not just to um, our methods, but evolving and adapting to the way teams handle things and teams put out items. And then too, as well as evolving towards the hobby as a whole. There are expectations in the hobby that change over time. Photo match is king now, but beforehand, you know, authentication could be a little not looser, but it wasn't as in depth because I don't necessarily want to say that previous authentication is not good enough. That's a disservice to the people that came before. But it's grown, it's developed. It's kind of like passing it down as the. It's almost like the idea of how technology has evolved. When you look at the 1940s, what we had versus 50 years later, it's been such a great spike in how things have changed to now. The photo matches we can get on items, even items from as far back as the 70s, 60s is crazy versus back then. We didn't necessarily have that because there wasn't as much of an online world. And I think that's another massive thing too, as it's become more accessible media and as we've been able to, forge more relationships too. That has been a big change as well, being able to have access to more and being able to connect with more organizations and individuals to obviously help us in our authentication, but form relationships that will be beneficial for both sides throughout the future.
It's Tales from the Warehouse, Volume 63. Pleased to be joined by Filipe Costa of MeiGray, MeiGray.com, Authentication Associate. Filipe, I'm going to tie this in to sports talk radio because you brought up wanting to work in the media. I was lucky enough to do sports talk radio for more than 25 years. It's the way that you have to approach it. I think this is something that's lost, and I'm glad you brought it up. In sports talk radio, you can go and you can host a show for the now in a market, but it certainly makes you a better talk show host if you have historical knowledge of the New York Giants throughout all of time, and you can draw reference and you can talk candidly and freely and with great knowledge and confidence about what was. And, oh, I haven't seen this since whatever. And even if you're of a certain age, you still have done your due diligence and you've read books and you've interviewed old timers and old coaches and you've watched old YouTubes and highlight footage. And maybe you have, somewhere along the line, all the Super Bowls on DVD or something like that. And you can go in and you can host a show for the now and you can talk about what the expectations are for Wilson and Jameis and Neighbors and Tracy and whatever. And that's great. Or you can talk about the Parcells era and you can keep on going back and back and back to Spider freaking Lockhart or whatever. All good. But it also makes you a better authenticator. Here's how I sew this up. It makes you a better authenticator if not only can you do the now stuff, but you do speak with knowledge and confidence. And you're like, well, here's what I know about the Flames in the 80s. And here's what I know about the Flames of today. That it speaks volumes to the authenticating prowess. And I don't want to sound like a butt kisser or a smoke blower, but I want my guys to know, and girls and whoever is doing this, I want them to know the history of authentication. And I think that that's something that gets lost. They're like, oh, here's a brand new sweater. Do it. All right, great. But when you start talking about the stuff of yesteryear, the bigger knowledge base, the broader knowledge base, the more experience you have, and the knowledge that you have of how it was done back then, that makes you worth your weight in gold.
Yeah, I mean, and I appreciate the compliments and everything, but it is true. I mean, I look to when I got here working with Jim and with Stu and Robin, and even going as far as Mike LaBeouf, who's been here a lot longer than I was. You go downstairs to while they're more sales related now. Look at Drew, look at what Dave Mizell, and obviously Barry, who started this company with Bob Gray. That's where it all started. It's funny too because I was in the authentication, in the authentication office and everything. There was one day Barry was working on a jersey, and to see the process that he goes through while he's working on it, and seeing how he's always done these things in his knowledge. Same goes with Jim. Jim was working. Jim had his own thing going on beforehand, and then started slowly becoming more and more part of MeiGray, and seeing their processes and the way they learn things, but also the way they teach as well, which is important because I was never taught to say like, oh, well, you need to do it exactly how we do. but it's more as we have guidelines and standards and what we want to achieve, but we have no necessarily an opinion on how you should do it, as long as it's done correctly. And that does grow into us learning new things where sometimes I can teach Jim something. I love it,
Hmm.
because being able to provide knowledge and feel like even something as simple as, I think a good example of that was and this was something that went on auction some time ago when I was first working here. There was an Allen Iverson rookie jersey. I looked at it and it kind of like rang some bells. I saw the dates it was matched to, and it asked Jim, like, I looked it up and tried to double check, and we ended up figuring out that it was for basketball fans, it was the jersey Allen Iverson was wearing when he crossed up Michael Jordan, which is like, and
Iconic, right?
the only reason I found that out was the night before. Just so happened to have been watching a video from a media company called SB Nation. They do a lot of sports coverage, and their YouTube site is called Secret Base, and they do a series called Untitled, where they talk about you know icons of sports leagues that never won a title. Allen Iverson famously made it to one NBA Finals, never won it, and like the first 5 minutes of the video is talking about the way he crossed up Jordan as a rookie, and something as simple as being watching videos and being aware of media like that leads to something like a jersey that would have been just a rookie Allen Iverson to, oh, it's that rookie Allen Iverson.
Right.
And it changed the letter, it changed the way it was marketed on auction and everything. So, like, even something as simple as that, just watching things and kind of collecting that knowledge, like you said, for a talk show and being able to have a breadth of history and knowledge. I may not know everything about sports, but there's someone in the company that might know something more than I do, or they might not know something and they might come to me like, "Oh, I know that you're interested in, soccer, and I might have a lot more knowledge soccer wise than someone else in the company." So it's a great, almost like a meeting of the minds, not to kind of put it a little bit of a pedestal there, but an idea of people are sharing this knowledge and even sharing with other hobbyists. I mean, I've talked to a couple different hobbyists. Sometimes if I'm having a little bit of an issue with an item that, a collector from a specific team or a specific sport might know a lot more than I do, and then I learn something and that gets passed on more. And it's always great, especially when people are want to share and collaborate, because they want to really really pass things on. I had a great conversation with Wade Hampton, former guest on the show, big blues collector at the
Sure.
expo, and like there was a lot of knowledge that he imparted on me related to the blues themselves, because I'm not a blues fan. I'm not super familiar with the team, but he's a collector and he's a big blues fan for a very long time, and he opened my eyes to a lot of information I didn't have. Nothing like scandalous or anything, but just like basic info about when sets are used, when how the blues handle auctions and all of that, like very basic stuff that to him he's like, yeah, it's whatever, it's like it's what I know. But for me, it's like this is important going forward if I get anything blues related. So I think collaboration is super important, but also being willing to ask questions, which I think it can be hard a little bit sometimes to admit I don't know this, but it's important to say I don't know this, but I want to learn it and I want to understand more.
Learning and understanding, all part of the collaboration and certainly the community of the game warns. And whether you're buying your first or your nth or your end or your nth sweater, summer sale, great chance to pick up some amazing stuff. It ends on Labor Day, and tick, 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 time is running thin. Also, with the new season, somewhere around 40-ish, high 30s, 40-ish, depending on whether you're listening to this away as far as the NHL. Send in your sweater request to get on the request list for the 25-26 NHL season. Sales at MeiGray.com. It's Tales from the Warehouse, Volume 63. MeiGray Authenticated, a day in the life, talking to our friend Filipe Costa, Authentication Associate. All right, so borrowing from the Beatles, again, not singing, just borrowing a lyric or two. You wake up, you get out of bed, you drag a comb across your head. What does a typical day in the MeiGray authentication offices look like? You gave us the setup with the cast of characters, whether it's Jim, whether it's Stu, whether it's Mike, whether it's Barry, whether it's Dave, whether it's Drew, whether it's this person, that person. There's a lot of characters that we all know by name, and perhaps we've met them at an expo or we've toured MeiGray. What time you getting in, and what does a typical day look like, sir?
Usually get in by 8 o'clock, kind of come in, get settled, have breakfast, pretty important. I think a lot of people, not to kind of have a little sidebar here, but I
It's the
think it's
most
important to
important meal of the day, Philippe. I agree with you.
get some food into you, get a little bit of
Yeah.
coffee into you, because it could either make or break the day. But at that point, if there's any, check emails, reach out to customers if there's anyone looking for an update, if there's anyone looking for more information, or even something as simple as fielding a pretty simple question. Sometimes people will just simply ask us about, hey, what's this hologram for? What this hologram number pertain to? What this tag number pertain to? But then, and once you kind of get into that, get into the rhythm of the day, tackle maybe, if there's an authentication piece that I was finishing up the day before, tackle that and get that wrapped up. Or if there's something new that needs to be, uh, you know, taken on to start the day, do that. I mean, and then just assessing how the day goes, because you might have a plan where I might plan, it's like, okay, I'm going to finish these 3 orders up today because I'm pretty close on it, and then get this started, and maybe, see if there's anything I can pitch in on, with someone else. Or you might have a day where you think you have your schedule planned out and suddenly a wrench gets thrown completely into it, and we have to be all hands on deck on something else. So it can be a little bit of, kind of a rat race almost to figure out what's going on during the day, but it's pretty it's a good rhythm. And for me, having a rhythm and routine is super important. I always struggled a lot with not having it, and I can say that, at least even when we do get moments where things need to be dropped and do suddenly, I know that's a little bit of the routine expectation in the authentication department
Uh,
at that
and
point.
and clients and customers have expectations, but not while the matching protocol is similar, and you're all doing hard work and you're looking for the match, and when it's done, it's done. Do you ever say, well, as far as time frame goes, it usually takes? Obviously, you have a mean, you have a median, you have an average in mind, but some of this stuff can be. You want to make sure it's right. Obviously, you want to make sure it's done efficiently, but maybe it just takes a little longer, and sometimes that's the case. Do you quote collectors it'll be a day or two? And if they're like, it's been 3, where are you? You're like, this is difficult. I want to make sure, I want to get it right. What do you usually say as far as time frame?
So from the outset, we always have our estimated turnaround time is usually 7 to 8 weeks. And that's really, and sometimes collectors have a bit of confusion, like, oh, it takes that long to authenticate. It's like, no, unfortunately, it doesn't, but there are always plenty of orders coming in. So it's the
Right.
idea of, you go in a queue, there's maybe 3 or 4 orders ahead of you, and that's usually the amount of time we expect to go through those orders, get to your order, and work on that. Like, if I'm going to be honest, like you said, some authentications could take some of this. You could be pretty simple and go through, maybe an hour or two. Some authentications could take several days, especially if we have to go out of our way to do some deeper research. I mean, I've gotten jerseys on my desk that might be, a half jersey worn in only one game of some sort of, uh, specialty night in the NBA or in the NHL. And it takes me 10, 15 minutes because we know exactly when it was supposed to be worn. And other times we get an item that's like, yeah, it might be one of these 3 seasons. And you have to go through those time periods to try to find a needle in a haystack. And it takes a lot longer. And then even if we don't have the media that we can find, we might have to go into a deeper dive and see where else we could look for stuff. But generally, that's 7 to 8 weeks is the estimate we give. But we always kind of add a little bit of caveat and say, like, look, there might be uh, we might be having to take longer because things may crop up, whether it's an internal project or something might end up where we have to do deeper research, or it could take less time because we could find a situation where, you have a string of customers that have some more modern jerseys and jerseys that are a lot easier to find photos for, and you're banging out jerseys and kind of feeling like you're, Muhammad Ali, getting all the KOs right after another. So it's crazy to think, and I imagine sometimes customers can be very confused why it takes that long. And I understand that completely. Do I probably felt the same way when I first learned about the job, but it's the reality of it. But we try to be as accommodating as possible as well, and we understand that it is a long time sometimes. So we try to give the most expectation that customers have, so that I would, essentially, I would rather surprise a customer with a shortened timeline than
Right.
disappoint them with a longer timeline than expected.
Summer sale is rounding third and headed for home. And again, check, it ends on Labor Day. Tick, tick, tick. So get in, get online, order. And there's still tons of good stuff. There's so many great deals to have. I was actually perusing, don't tell my boss, I was actually perusing MeiGray.com today during a couple of down moments, and I'm going, maybe. Let's see. Fantastic deals. Again, check out the terms, but it ends on Labor Day. And also, the way to get on the request list for the coming NHL season is sales@MeiGray.com. And again, it doesn't, and we always say this, and it's total truth. Sure, it is players that currently play on said roster, but if you have an inkling that somebody might get moved to your favorite team or somebody that's under the MeiGray umbrella, be it any of the teams, send it. All they can do is, again, you're not wishing it, you're not speaking it into existence, this deal, but if this player winds up on that team, you'll be first, and there's something to that. So good on you. As far as the process, if somebody's watching right now, if somebody's listening to the podcast, how do they get their sweaters or their items authenticated by MeiGray, Philippe?
So first step is obviously reaching out to us and getting the ball rolling in that regard, whether it's through our submission on our website in the Authentications tab. We can start a conversation there, whether you want to speak via email or phone call. You could also reach out directly to authenticators. I mean, my email is fcosta@migray.com. Any sort of requests, questions, we try to get as much information we can on what exactly you're sending in so we know what to expect. And also just to kind of give a customer an idea of what they should expect
Mm-hmm.
on the work that we do and everything like that. Once we kind of nail that down, get you pricing so you know exactly what you're going to be paying for, we go through the process and then get the jersey sent in, or it can be dropped off. We have plenty of customers who live close enough or might be in the area at a certain point in time, and they'll drop it off. I mean, we've always had a door open policy. With things like that, we always say, hey, just give us a heads up when you're swinging by, and then we'd be more than happy to, intake your item and maybe even show you a bit around. I've done that with plenty of customers. Once that comes in, that's when the 7 to 8 weeks starts. Then we go through the process of authenticating. When you actually get to your item, we assess provenance, we assess any sort of paperwork that comes with it. We try to see and cross-reference it with any similar items that we have, or see if that we have previous research on similar items. And then you get down really into it and get into the weeds of finding the photos, checking the dates, seeing, does this match up? Does this make sense? I mean, we try to get as much information before the process starts too. Try to get photos of the item beforehand so we can see if there's maybe any red flags, because I think a big thing, especially, and a big thing that's also changed throughout my time here, is we want to make sure that we're using the customer's time as economically as possible. If someone sends something in, and because not every collector is super aware of what items are, and there's no shame in that, not everyone's going to know everything. There's plenty of stuff that I didn't know going into this job, but sometimes people will have a retail item that they think is an authentication item. So to kind of save the hassle of shipping an item to MeiGray, finding out, after a week of shipping that it's just a retail jersey and you've essentially wasted money and time on shipping it to and from, we try to get that out of the way beforehand. Do a quick vetting process,
Mm-hmm.
because we want to make sure that if you have something you want to send in, that it is worth your time and your money to send it in, and then talk pricing and everything like that. Because realistically, it's, no one wants to have to go through sending something out, especially if they're concerned about, having it in the mail. We get all those concerns a lot. And then coming back and being told like, yeah, you don't really have, anything that we can work on, unfortunately. It's a disappointment. It's a bummer, but also it can be frustrating too, I imagine. It's like, well, I just sent this out and now they're telling me that it's no good without even doing the work on it. So we do that too, to kind of get ahead of those kind of problems and those headaches for the customer, because it doesn't make sense for us to do that. It's a little not irresponsible necessarily to kind of go about that way, but it is a more appropriate and more customer friendly way to do it, by getting a grasp on the item that's coming in and informing the customer, this might not be something that's worth sending in because it might not be a game worn jersey. But
No, it's great. It's good. You flip the microscope, or you flip the telescope around. You're like, before we get to the nitty gritty of discovering what this is, let's find out what it definitely isn't. And I want to make sure that it definitely isn't a retail. I want to make sure that it definitely doesn't have a fake set stamp or a forged set stamp. Not the collector would have anything to do with that. Hey, I just found this and I think there's a there. Well, can you tell me a little bit about it? I'm sure that that intro phone call, email where you say, can you snap a couple of photos? And again, this is, you mentioned the process is so involved. And, we always like to try to dive in or just even dip a toe in. You mentioned the cross-referencing. You mentioned the photos. You mentioned let's look up for other things from the era to see if there's clues. Does the process change, vintage versus modern? And I imagine the answer is yes and no, but there's also the volume of picture and reference material that you have access to, easy for me to say, that, hey, this is a 1953 blank. And yeah, there were a lot of pictures taken back then, but the pictures were taken, by the Flintstones camera and were sort of at a disadvantage.
Yeah, a lot of comments that I hear, especially from friends, it's like it was taken on a potato because that's how bad it is. But you're right. It is a yes and a no because we have a lot of modern stuff that we get in, especially if it's something where someone's sending in a Warriors jersey. MeiGray has the Warriors game worn program. Someone sends in a Draymond Green jersey from a specific season. It's like, cool. We have these jerseys that we know we sold and we authenticated as part of the Warriors deal, and at that point, we can say like, all right, we can narrow it down really, really well and figure out, exactly what games it isn't because we've already done a lot of work on it. But then you could still get modern stuff where if we get a team that we don't necessarily have a contract with, someone sends in a Chicago Bulls jersey from this most recent season. I don't think we've gotten any 24-25 Chicago Bulls jerseys. So you'd go through the whole time period at that point versus vintage stuff where most of the time we have to kind of go through it and rifle through everything to figure out what we're looking at versus, maybe it's a player that's popular enough or a player that's been submitted long enough that, there's tons of matches to this guy because he was put in, one or two jerseys at a time because that's how the specific team or league handle those jerseys. And we have kind of a path to where we need to go and a path on, all right, these dates have been looked at in the, 93-4 season. And then we move on and kind of just spot check those dates to make sure that, to compare this jersey to it because while we photo match those dates to a different jersey, but always check because that's what you should always do. But yeah, I always tell customers it's a case by case basis with each item because they'll ask questions and understandably ask things like, what are the expectations? I get a lot of like, what's the percentage of this matching? It's like, I really can't tell you because I can have a jersey from, I can get a LeBron jersey from, 2 years ago that might be difficult to match. And suddenly there's, you know, a Walton jersey that comes in, and out of nowhere we have these great matches to this Walton jersey, even though it's been so long
Right.
that he's played, and so far it's a real shot in the dark. And you'd be surprised sometimes how many modern items have, a lack of media or even a lack of quality media. Uh, It's a luck of the draw, really, and that's what makes the job interesting and sometimes frustrating too, because you get some great items that you kind of sit there and it's like I can't find anything on it. There's just not enough.
Still great items available in the summer sale. That comes to a close September 1st. Get in while you can, mygray.com. And then right after that, season will be here. Get online, get your emails in, sales@mygray.com, requests for the coming NHL season 25-26. You told us about the AI crossing up, MJ. There are amazing stories of each time you go to your desk and you're like, this is cool, this is cool, this is cool. There's also ridiculous items on sale right now at mygray.com. There's a reverse retro Rangers from Shesterkin. There's a Tatum City edition. There are Austin Matthews skates. Tell me a little bit about, and again, those are all instantly iconic as well, but whether it's something of the AI ilk or just sort of the authentication process of a Rangers RR, Mr. Shesterkin, for instance.
Yeah, I mean, you get items like that the from as a lot of us know, the New York Rangers are game worn programs handled through Fanatics. What to our experience, it's usually a lot more straightforward when you have a program like that. Same goes with the Tatum, where, you're given maybe a specific date or a specific set dates, and then you go to those games. It was with the Shishirkin. Both Dave Mizell and I did work on that Shishirkin that came in for consignment, and we were able to find a couple different dates for it, and it lined up with what, Fanatics said. And then you have situations like that Tatum. That Tatum was a lot. Those Tatum jerseys, that specific City Edition was very interesting to work with. For those that may have never seen it, there is some wood paneling on the side, on the fabric, that after looking at enough of those, led to a realization that the wood grain pattern that they sublimated in is unique to each jersey. So
Wow.
much so that looking at the seam lines, and even where they have microphone pockets pre-stitched in, that's a photo match point. And if you have clear enough photos. So that Tatum, usually those, especially through Fanatics, they'll maybe labeled as a one-game jersey. Sometimes they'll be worn multiple games. It's really, I don't think it's necessarily a deficiency in things. It's just more, how dates are reported and how items are sent in. And let's be honest, equipment managers have a lot going on with dealing with the team, traveling and everything.
And
So
they're not really hobbyists. So
they're
pardon
not,
them
they're
for not having us high on their list. That's where MeiGray comes in
Exactly. So
hard,
it's
right?
never, I never sit there and think like, well, I wish he would have been a little bit more direct or a little bit more consistent with it. It's more like, all right, well, I have this information from, the COA from Fanatics, that they got this information from the team, likely through the equipment manager, and we'll work from there because we know how the habits of these things are. And that's kind of, segues perfectly into those Austin Matthews skates, because the date I matched them to were not the date that was on the paperwork from the Toronto Maple Leafs. Now, that was a style of skates that Matthews wore for a large portion of the season. So there were a couple different skates based on my research that he wore in that kind of wrapping, because it has this, I believe it was the city of Toronto on the outside of it as the
Hmm.
skyline. But like, it's not a deficiency on the Toronto Maple Leafs. I'm not sitting there and saying like, well, they should have done better keeping track of this. It's like, no, there's a lot going on. And the game one side of things, which I think sometimes gets lost on um, the hobby itself, and even sometimes I think I get lost on it too. It's not the number one, because you're running a sports team and you're running a business. So you kind of, is even myself, sometimes I wish that we could have a little bit more consistency, but it's not. I'm not going to sit there and bemoan the situation, because I know that's not high on the totem pole. It is what it is, but it's kind of helps us to be better authenticators, to have to deal with those hurdles and those stumbling blocks and get an item where it's supposed to be. And I mean, all of those are real cool items to work with, especially when you're working in collaboration with someone else on authentication. There's a lot of times that Dave and I do that with consignments that come in, and it's kind of the idea too of how we want everyone in the company to be familiar with not just the authentication process, but just how MeiGray runs. So, if there's anything sales related, I can certainly tackle it on a basic level, because I know how to run an invoice and handle payment and all of that stuff, deal with a sale if need be. But that's kind of the where we want to be at. And Dave and I have worked on a couple different items before, and a lot of it will sometimes just be confirming his work, because it's, while he's not in the authentication department, he still has authenticating chops. Or it'll be
Hmm.
something where he's like, hey, you need to handle this. You can do it from the get go. I haven't done any work on it. I haven't had a chance. So it's always items like that that are interesting and fun, and like, they're good pieces that are available. And, I'm not a Rangers fan or a Celtics fan or a Leafs fan, to be honest, but like it's Tatum, Marner, and Shesterkin. They're some of the best at what they do. And they're good pieces. They were fun to work on. I'll
I'm
admit it.
sure. Guys that are good at their jobs. It's Tales from the Warehouse, Volume 63, MeiGray Authenticated, A Day in the Life. I am getting smarter by the minute, which is very, very pleasant for me, because I'm learning from Filipe Costa, Authentication Associate over at MeiGray, MeiGray.com. We talked a little bit about this earlier, and you have the early vetting process where you're like, I want to make sure there's a there. You do the work and it doesn't pass standards, which doesn't mean it was not game worn at some point in time. You guys have always been very honest about that. Look, we can't give it our seal of approval, but we just would like to tell you, what's that conversation like? How do you go about delivering the news? And talk to me a little bit about, without, you don't have to name names or name sweaters. I'm sure people are like, darn it, that's not what I wanted to hear.
Yeah, no one ever wants to be told their item doesn't match to anything or can't be authenticated. We, like you said, we're pretty clear on the difference between something that doesn't match versus something that's inconclusive. I mean, there's been plenty of items where you sit there and you go through all the dates and it's like all these photos are not great, they're super blurry, or it might be a jersey that just doesn't have a lot of loose threads. I think a particular era of jerseys that I can think of being not necessarily an issue, but usually running into that is a lot of the mid 2000s NBA jerseys, because that's when mesh holes kind of started slowly cycling out, and you get materials that are tightly knit, or they're almost kind of like a dazzle material that's very smooth, very similar to ultrafill. And it's like, well, you're really working on mesh. You're not working on mesh holes anymore. You're working on loose threads. And if, threads get cut, whether it's over time or they just kind of fall off, and some of that stuff isn't there anymore, so you get items that you're just kind of like, I can't make a real decision on this aside from the professional version of throwing up your arms and going, you know no one wants to hear that. Customers
Right.
do get frustrated sometimes, and I feel for them, so I understand that. So I usually try my best to kind of explain, like, look, this is where we're at with the item. We give them as much information as we can in terms of what research we did. If we find I mean, we'll find situations where we'll look at images and be like, this looks like it might be, but it's like you're looking, kind of trying to hunt through pixels to verify it's that specific thread or that specific mesh hole. And that's not really something we can afford to sit there and write a letter on it, because we have seen, times where we look at a jersey that we might say is, inconclusive, but there's something there in some games. And then suddenly another jersey comes in later on and it definitely matches to that game. So if we had written a letter previously on, you know, not super clear evidence, that would have been a mistake on our part. And even then, I think the biggest example too is what we've seen is on NBA jerseys a lot, especially modern ones. There are specific times where numbers, where they finish the stitching, you see threads coming off the same place on multiple jerseys. So like, okay, well, I see that thread and that's the only thing I see. I'll tell the customer I see that, but at the same time, we know based on our prior knowledge that that's not definitive or conclusive enough to call a match. Versus if we see those threads and then suddenly, oh, the mesh holes line up on the jersey, it's got the right fabric pattern, if that's something unique, and that's something we can say, oh yeah, definitely a match. So it can be a difficult conversation, but we always try to preface and say, like, look, we don't guarantee a match. That's the important thing too, because we can't give a false sense of security or a false sense of finality going into the process, because that's a disservice to the customer. That's a disservice to what we do as authenticators as well.
And Philippe, it's also part of, and again, thank you for that, because I think that that's something that gets skipped over. Look, we're here with the good news and we're here for the bad news. That's all part of adding trust, building trust, and keeping the hobby as clean and clear as we all deserve it to be. Look, we're going to give you the good news, but there may be times when we give you inconclusive news. I don't want to say bad news, but that's, that ultimately what you guys do as an authentication associate, as the other folks in the authentication department, is we want to help. We want to help the collector get the most bang for their buck. You may have a fantastic sweater. It gets value added to it through matching and letters and authentication, as opposed to, look what I got hanging in my closet. You're like, that's a great Filipe Costa sweater from the 1991 season, and I know it's legit, but it would be that much better with a letter and some photographic evidence for any future collectors. And again, oh, the letter's not worth what, but you do so much more than just an LOA. And that's where this is about, adding the value and building, again, the trust and trustworthiness to the product and to the business.
Yeah, definitely agree. I mean, we get a lot of people reaching out saying, "Well, I was referred to you," or "I was told that you were the ones to go to," or they'll see things on an auction that comes with one of our letters, comes with our paperwork or anything like that. And it's a lot of word of mouth that comes to that. And there's again, not to toot our own horn, but there's evidence of the value that becomes added, not just because of our letters in general, but just the photo matching process itself, because that is the definitive. Like when you look at the item, that's the the proof is in the pudding there. That's what you see is what you're getting. You're not speculating and you're not trying to say like, well, I got this from so and so, who got it from here, who got it from there, who got it from there. I guess you get a lot of that, and that stuff turns out to be good. But the photo match is really the thing that, whether it comes with a letter or not, that's the hobby's pretty much in agreement that the photo match is the end all be all for the item. You know, you, and that's kind of what we're all based on, the photo match and the item. So I always, I always understand the end of saying like, well, the letter shouldn't be the end all be all, and I agree too. The end all be all should be the photo match because you do sometimes see items that may have LOAs that will say it's one thing, and it might just be a little bit inaccurate, and then you might be able to find something better or an item that might be a little
Sure.
bit lesser than you expected at that point. That does inform the collector's decision to purchase at that point to be able to know like, okay, I definitely know this is exactly what I'm getting when I put the money down for the item, as opposed to I'm going to take a chance on this, which people still do, and I understand that. Take a chance on it, and then it comes out to be a little bit less than what you expected. But that's the reality of the hobby. Unless something is perfectly photo matched, it is a gamble. But photo matching is always hurt. I mean, it's always said photo matching is king at that point. You can't really dispute a photo match unless it's. I can't even think of a reason to dispute a
I
specific
hear
photo
you.
match.
I hear you. As we continue, Tales from the Warehouse, Volume 63, talking to Authentication Associate Filipe Costa, MeiGray Authenticated for this Volume 63, A Day in the Life. Um, it's still way too early, although the annuals are starting to come out, and again, we're roughly 40 days prior to the season, so you can go to your supermarket, you can go to your drugstore if you don't order prescriptions online or what have you. You can find an NHL annual. I'll ask you this: we'll play. Philippe Kramer's Mad Money, if you will. So we'll just buy stocks from the MeiGray partner team. You buy in stock. We got Minnesota, and you can correct me here. We got Minnesota, we got Philly, we got Columbus, we got Washington, we got Nashville, we got New Jersey. And obviously, there are also NBA partner teams, the Lakers, the Clips, we got Warriors, we got Charlotte, we got WNBA recently with the Aces and whatnot, and we got the Valkyries and lots of really good things going on across the board over at MeiGray.com. Plus, by the way, summer sale. Getting ready to head to the finish line. It ends on Labor Day. Check it out, MeiGray.com. And if you want to get on the request list for that coming 25-26 season for the partner clubs or anything, because MeiGray gets their hands on a lot of things, not just the partner teams. People can sign all the time. Hey, might you have access to this? Sales at MeiGray.com. Buying stocks, yay or nay on, I'll just throw them out. Minnesota, buying stocks this year on them?
I would buy. They had a whole little debacle with Marco Rossi, retaining and staying on the team. Obviously, Fleury retired, but he was not necessarily the starter. I'd buy on them. They're a good team. They looked good to start the series against Vegas, but I feel that they kind of sputtered a bit at the end. Vegas is just a very good team in general, but I'd buy on them. I think that we're going to see them continue to improve, and you get a full season of Kirill Kaprizov and a full season of Eriksson Ek. I think you're really moving well at that with that team at that point. They look good. I like Minnesota.
I'm buying Columbus for sure. And maybe I don't want to say maybe they're overcooked, but they were so great in that last stretch of last season. And I love Jet in net. They were doing everything right, and they just were paddling as fast as they could. They were on fire down the stretch, Philippe.
I think they're great, and I think they've got especially that young core. But I think what I want to see from them is Kent Johnson really take that step forward going on now. I mean, Sean Monahan was such a great ad for that team. They also played through so much adversity throughout last season, and I think they're going to sit there and they're going to still use that, kind of keep pushing them going forward. But you're going to need the big steps from the younger guys. Kent Johnson, he's got to show up. I think he's done a great job so far, but he's really got to take a next stride. And I'm thinking of Yegor Chinikov. He's been a little bit outs with the front office. I think he's a fantastic player, especially playing with guys like Marchenko there. It'll be interesting to see how his situation with the team goes because I think he's still under contract, but there has been a little bit of friction there. But if he can stay healthy and play well, I think that team, at the very least, their top six, is looking good. They're going to make some noise. I could see them probably usurping maybe one of the Metro teams or at least a wild card spot.
Okay, and we'll get to one of those Metro teams in just a little bit. You buying Philly, or you buying Philly if you can get them at a good price?
Philly, if I can get them at a good price, because they had ups and downs last year. They've added some pieces over the summer, but I still feel like they're still in that process of rebuilding, which isn't bad. That's what they need to do.
Right.
I thought that the whole situation with Cutter Gauthier for them was unfortunate. He's a fantastic piece that they could have had, but I'm not. It's hard to comment on that. The way sports and these are people and individuals. They want to handle their lives the way they want to. It is what it is. Philly's always not going to like the guy, but Philly's very loyal to their city, and I
Right.
completely understand that. But I do think that you buy on them if they're cheap, but they might take steps, but I don't feel like they're just there yet. They need the crease is looking a little rough. I think they need to figure out the crease, and then there's a lot of times in the NHL nowadays you need to build from the net out and that rate. And I think if you were able to do that and maybe stock up a little bit on the forward side, I think Philly in a few years should be ready to take that next step.
All right, couple more for stocks. Nashville, speaking of building from the net out, obviously the skates of Pecorine were very, very hard to fill. They have a workhorse in Mr. Soros. They spent a lot of money last offseason.
Yeah, I look, I like Nashville. I like what Trotz has tried to do, but I felt that he pivoted a little bit too much between rebuild and and reloading. It's going to be tough to say if they're healthy and if their top guys are really shooting their shots the way they should be. I think they should be good. I mean, you say Saros is always a dependable guy going forward. You can count on him. Yossi dealing with, I forget what the name of the medical condition is, but a heart condition that if he stands up too quickly, he gets dizzy, and
Hmm.
that's going to be big for them because Yossi is such a fantastic defender in the NHL. But I am speculative on their stock. It's hard to see, especially with how the West has such juggernauts sometimes with Edmonton, Dallas, even Vegas, even Winnipeg if they can keep things together. Nashville is a hard sell for me because not their issues, but what they have to go up against with some of the struggles they've had.
All right, last two quick ones. Washington, the record, the chase is now complete. So we can focus. I think, going into last season, and I'm right here in the suburbs of DC, it was about the record, but it was about can the young guys step up? I think it's even more about the young guys because the window is really with Backstrom and Oshie off the books and really not out of sight, out of mind, but I guess out of sight, out of mind, for lack of a better phrase. It's going to be a different vibe around this team this year.
You might hate me for saying this, Scott, but I feel like Caps are definitely a sell team at this point.
Okay.
Um, Great story, obviously, great narrative with Ovechkin going for the record and having everything so close, so handled and done. But I feel that not that people are going to phone it in, but it just feels like it's almost like an idea of like they really gave that second wind this past season. How are they going to bounce back this year with, but she's got the record. I don't think
Right.
he's not gonna slack off. He's never been a guy to slack off like that. But it always feels like I think it's not the best example to give, but looking at soccer for a second, the story with Messi winning the World Cup was everyone coming behind him to finally push him towards that goal. Or even many moons ago when Portugal won the Euros in 2016, they got behind Ronaldo to help him get that trophy.
Hmm.
They need to find some unifying force to do it because the team is in a spot where they're not a contender for the cup, but they can be a playoff team consistently. They need to find something to rally around. Obviously, Ovechkin last season was a great rally point. If they can find it and kind of pull it, sometimes it's really in the heart. You need to play your heart out, and I think they need to find that. Otherwise, I can see them getting passed by a couple different teams in the Metro, especially when you see the Rangers miss the playoffs last year. I would be shocked if they missed it again, and that's a
Hmm.
team to really Capitals need to keep an eye on at that point.
All right, last one. Your beloved New Jersey Devils, sir.
I'm bullish on the Devils. I've always been bullish on the Devils. Health will be a big one. I mean, obviously Jack Hughes wasn't able to play a full season.
Correct. You
I
lost a
think
month, 6 weeks with Markstrom, something like that.
yes, yeah, and that one was a freak accident as well. And
Of
then you got all
course.
the injuries in the playoffs. mean, we had 3 guys get hurt in game 1 against Carolina, and they still somehow managed to push, win 1 game out of that. But the Devils are in an interesting spot. Their top 6 looks good. Their defensive ranks look good, even with Kovacevic hurt. Goaltending, I mean, Jake Allen and Jacob Markstrom, despite the age, are probably one of the best tandems in the league. Markstrom is an absolute animal when it comes to the intensity. I mean, he's a little bit of shades of Tuukka Rask with, the game doesn't go well, he loses it, snaps
Right.
the stick. But if the game goes well, he's locked in. He's got
Puts
the
really
net
good
down.
wear on his sweaters too, Felipe.
Oh, absolutely. I've seen some of his Flames and Canucks jerseys too. Like, they look
Yes.
fantastic.
He's a
But
shot magnet. He puts a really, I'm pondering a Markstrom.
I think it comes down to the big one, health.
Mm-hmm.
As long as the team stays healthy, they're definitely one of the top teams in the league, because they did so well from, I want to say, October to December, because they were just putting teams out to the pasture. I mean, it wasn't even a second thought the Devils would win. It's that, and it's trying to. You obviously got to get Luke Hughes signed. That's a big one. I don't think that'll be an issue necessarily of him wanting to put pen to paper, more of just making the money work, and maybe finding that top guy to kind of put on Jack's wing with Bratt. And there's a few options in the league. I mean, Jared McCann would be great. I'd love the Devils to take a big old swing, maybe get Jason Robertson, or maybe they finally complete the trifecta and get Quinn Hughes.
Right.
I mean, you can't go wrong at picking up the second best defenseman, if not the best defenseman in the league. You always Cam Makar and everything like that, but I mean, the Devils have the ability to go on a run. I do feel like some teams in the Metro have gotten a little bit weaker. The Rangers will definitely bounce back, but I think the Rangers definitely have a little bit of a deficiency in their depth. Devils address that with Connor Brown and Evgeny Dodonov, and they've got some. I'm excited for Arseny Gretzuk. I'm not gonna say he's the second coming of Kovalchuk, but this kid looks good.
But maybe.
Uh,
Right.
it's adjustment. I
Yep.
think I'm buying on the Devils, but I always buy on the Devils anyways.
I
I sat through
understand.
I sat through enough bad seasons in the mid 2010s to at this point not want to be hopeful for this team. But I think Devils are a good bet even from a neutral standpoint.
All right, as we close volume 63, real quick clock, 2 minutes, and we go. It's overtime, where we talk about just stuff off topic. I kudos to Casey and you guys on the Reels and Instagram and wherever it made its debut, recently talking about the greatest sports venue or best sports venues that you've ever been. And you mentioned a certain stadium in Porto, in Portugal.
Yes.
And I, give me a little bit more on that, and then I'll throw one at you that I was lucky enough to. Again, it wasn't like it was the prettiest or most historic, but the vibe was electric. You first.
Well, it was Estádio do Dragão. That's where FC Porto plays. They're my favorite team growing up. I fell in love with the team as a kid, as early as I can remember, and I've been to a couple games there at this point. And I remember it was, I believe, against Sporting de Braga, a great game. I mean, I was a couple seats from the corner flag at one point, but it was just, soccer is very special in terms of when you talk about the atmosphere at a stadium. I mean, I went to a Club World Cup game this summer at MetLife. It was Porto against Al Ahly, one of the top teams in Egypt, and even being near those Al Ahly fans, the atmosphere was unbelievable. That's a game in New Jersey, as opposed to, so going to a home game there was amazing, and it's a stadium with a lot of rich history. I mean, Lionel Messi made his very first game, 2004, played at that stadium, and I loved it. I want to go back. I'm trying to go back next year to catch a game at some point every time I go over to Portugal. But like, it's a beautiful stadium. It's open air. It's not completely covered on the walls because you have a roof, but
Mm-hmm.
then the roof has an opening between the roof itself and where the stands start. So like, you could see the sunset in the middle of the game because a lot of those games start in the late afternoon into the night. Gorgeous views of the city. And again, very biased. They're my favorite team, like hands down. If I had to choose a team if I had to give up any club teams at all on all sports, Porto would be the one team I stick with. I'm sorry to the Devils, sorry to the Giants, but Porto is my bread and butter and the love of my life, essentially. And going to that stadium was just, you get a sense of awe. I imagine people who went to the Joe when it was still around in Detroit, or people who, went to the old Eagles stadium when they went to those stadiums. I imagine they felt that awe. That's what I felt, especially, I was a kid,
Right.
going there, the atmosphere, everything. I wouldn't trade it for the world.
The connection is absolutely something. I've been lucky enough to I'm lucky enough to have visited Dodger Stadium for a couple of opening days, and I'm not a Dodger fan, but sitting there and looking out at the palm trees and the mountains and the valley and the Dodger blue, you get swept up in it. It's gorgeous. I don't know what else to say. I have not been to Augusta for the Masters, though I hear it's like Disney World of grass and not a blade is out of place. It's also apparently, and this doesn't show up on TV, it's like the hilliest walk for the patrons, as they call them. It's not the crowd, it's the patrons who are enjoying themselves. I've been to Fenway. I sat behind a post at Fenway, but you know what? You go, and that's why you go. I've been to Lambeau. That was, I'll use an adult word, that was badass. And the people are so nice, despite you're sitting on like high school benches. It's a college atmosphere. But again, everybody's Midwest nice, which is awesome. And it's a great atmosphere. But by far, and I grew up going to the Spectrum and I went to Veterans Stadium and whatnot. But the best one within the last year and a half, when we were in Barcelona for visiting a kid abroad, I went to RCDE and I saw Espanyol play Real Madrid. And it was, and Espanyol beat them 1-0. It was
Yeah,
like a must, or else they were going to, I guess, relegate or something like that. But they needed the win to stay alive. And they beat the world's quote unquote greatest team. The fact that we got to see Real Madrid made my kid really happy. But the fact that the locals won, Philippe, the atmosphere was unparalleled. The people
I've
were over the moon. And this is a stadium, and it's modern. It's right next to a mall. You get off the train. I loved every second of it.
it's the one thing that I've always, a big bucket list of mine is to go to some local stadiums
Mm-hmm.
in throughout Europe. There's because it just, as much as I love Porto, those atmospheres just look so different because
Mm-hmm.
there's so much local passion. It's the closest comparison I can make to something that people in the U.S. might be more familiar with is the passion that college football fans have.
Yes.
And there's always a running joke that's like, the European mind could never comprehend college football, and it's like maybe
The
not in a
American
sense.
mind can't comprehend that.
I think it would be a lot more fun if bring a college football fan to experience some local soccer game and the
Right.
passion there, and then do kind of like a cultural exchange and have that Spaniol fan come and watch like a Bama Georgia game. I mean, they'd
Right.
probably be losing their minds and thinking like, oh, this is why Americans like football. Now it makes sense. Now this sport makes sense to me. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stadiums I'd kill to go to. And I hope I can still go to. I mean, I haven't gone to a ton. I've been to MetLife 3 times. I still haven't seen a football game at MetLife. I've
It,
seen 4 times, 3 soccer games and a hockey game at MetLife. Have yet to see a football game there.
Perfect. And if you get back to CFC Porto, please take me with you. Philippe, this has been a blast. Summer sale, again, is headed toward the finish line. MeiGray.com. It ends on Labor Day. And the season, as far as the NHL goes, will be here before you know it. If there's a partner club, or even if it's just a player that interests you, get on that request list. Sales@MeiGray.com. This has been Tales from the Warehouse, Volume 63. Always a fantastic conversation and then some. Mr. Costa, thank you, thank you, thank you. It's Filipe Costa, the Authentication Associate at MeiGray. MeiGray Authenticated, a day in the life. Until next time, I'm Scott for Philippe.
I'm Philippe.
Exactly. The warehouse is closed.